CityCast is brought to you by Wise, the app for international people using money around the globe. With Wise, you can send, spend, and receive up to 40 currencies with only a few simple taps and save up to 55% compared to major banks. Plus, Wise won't add hidden fees to your transfer. Whether you're buying souvenirs with pesos in Puerto Vallarta or sending euros to tip your Coliseum tour guide, you know you're getting a fair exchange rate with no extra markups. Be smart. Join the 15 million customers who choose Wise. Download the Wise app today or visit wise.com. Learn more by visiting wise.com/US/compare. T's and C's apply.
Today on CityCast DC, President Trump is clearing homeless encampments. Now, clearing encampments has been one of the major pillars of Trump's desire to make DC more, quote unquote, beautiful as part of the continued takeover of the city's law enforcement. He's even asked Congress for $2 billion for these efforts. But he's not necessarily alone, because Mayor Muriel Bowser has also cleared encampments in D.C., most notably a big spate in March of this year. But what are the numbers? Where are these folks going? And are there enough shelters for these folks to go to? I spoke with the Washington Post's Marissa Lang. Today is Tuesday, August 26th. I'm Bridget Todd, and here's what D.C. is talking about. Marissa, thank you so much for being here. So we understand that Trump has made this big push to remove homeless folks from the city. How did this all come to be?
So Trump has been talking a lot about cleaning up the District of Columbia. He says he wants to make the city safer and more beautiful. And one of the things that he's really zeroed in on is street homelessness. So we're talking about tents, we're talking about folks who are sleeping outside. And in the course of rolling out the federal takeover of DC police and the National Guard being put into the district, Trump has made a point of mentioning that one of the areas that these federal officers will be focusing on is moving homeless folks out of the city.
Was that the plan that he always sort of wanted to execute here in D.C.? Not necessarily putting people in beds, giving people resources, just saying, you need to leave the district?
It does seem that he's really focused on removing people from the streets, that he wants them to be out of sight. There hasn't been a lot of conversation out of the White House about, for example, finding homes for people or other things that advocates might describe as a more solutions-oriented approach. It's been very much about the look and feel of downtown DC and wanting to make the city more aesthetically pleasing and more friendly to pedestrians and tourists. This is also a continuation of a number of executive orders that the Trump administration has put out targeting homeless folks and directing local agencies to do things like increase involuntary commitments of people who they suspect are having mental health crises and things like that.
You mentioned that this was really focused on the areas where Trump or folks in his administration might reasonably go, downtown around the White House. Am I to understand that they're less concerned about the neighborhoods where I live, like Columbia Heights, like the different non-downtown parts of the city? Are they less concerned about homeless folks being in those parts of the city?
It's sort of hard to know because we've certainly seen federal agents out in those parts of the city. Notably, there's been a lot of immigration enforcement in neighborhoods like Columbia Heights and Mount Pleasant and some of the more northern parts of the city. Recently, we've seen videos and I've heard reports of federal officers being east of the river in Anacostia. So they're definitely in other parts of the city. But when it comes to homeless enforcement and some of the encampment sweeps that we've seen, those have been really concentrated on the downtown corridor, areas around some federal buildings like the State Department. And it's kind of difficult to say if that is because that's where the Trump administration is telling these officers to focus, or if that just happens to be where a lot of homeless folks who sleep outside tend to congregate. Part of that is because it puts them closer to places where they get services. It puts them closer to day centers where they can go inside and get a shower or get some food. A lot of outreach programs center their outreach in parks and places where they know people congregate downtown. The Martin Luther King Library, for example, is downtown, and that's a place where people will go and spend the day and charge their devices and hang out at the cafe. So it's a little bit of chicken or egg, I think. week. It's sort of difficult to know if they're just telling people we want to clear the encampments out of downtown or if that happens to be where you see most of them.
So are they just arresting these folks?
So actually, no. There has been little to no evidence that the Trump administration is actually arresting homeless people. And I have been trying to chase that down for the last 2 weeks since the federal takeover has been announced. And as far as we know, there has been no evidence that any homeless folks have been arrested for sleeping outside or for having a tent up.
What do you think is going on there? Because that is really surprising to me.
It's interesting because that was definitely the rhetoric, right? At the beginning of all of this, the Trump administration was saying that if you don't move, you will be arrested. If you don't disperse immediately when federal agents come to clear an encampment, that they will be arresting people. But the fact is, they haven't. And homelessness, as many legal advocates are quick to point out, is not in and of itself illegal. So they would have to arrest folks for other crimes or misdemeanors like resisting law enforcement or not following an order. And in a lot of these sweeps, when federal officers have shown up and pushed people out, folks have been more or less compliant. They've packed up their stuff, they've moved, they've gone somewhere else, they've gotten out of the way. So we have not seen the arrests that the rhetoric would lead people to believe is happening.
When that kind of thing happens, when MPD or ICE comes to an encampment, have you spoken to these folks about what that experience is like for them?
Absolutely. So I've been covering homelessness in the district for more than 5 years at this point. And there are a lot of folks that I've met out on the street for whom being evicted from an encampment is just sort of a fact of life of being homeless and living on the streets in the District of Columbia. And the experience, as far as they've told it, is pretty similar to what it was like before the Trump takeover, that you have police officers from different agencies coming out and telling people to clear out. The one difference that I think is notable is the amount of time that people are given to leave. Previously, under the Bowser administration and when the National Park Service did a lot of its evictions, people were routinely given about a 2-week window of notice before an encampment was cleared out. And sometimes it would be more than that, upwards of a month or so. But at least 2 weeks was sort of normal practice. In the cases we've seen since the federal takeover, sometimes it's been just a couple days or a 24-hour period or a weekend before an encampment eviction was being carried out. So there's been sort of a compressed notice period, but the actual eviction itself has been really similar. And a lot of the homeless folks I've talked to have kind of described it to me as like, yeah, this is just more of the same.
That's something that I try to impart on people who are trying to figure out the situation, who maybe don't live in D.C. or are less familiar with how things have gone here before this all happened. It's not as if the Bowser administration has been some, deep friend to the homeless. Like, it's not as if the administration was against removing encampments and all of that. That was certainly happening. It was just happening in a different way with more time on a different timeline, not happening as quickly as we see now. Do I have that right?
Exactly. And actually, the Bowser administration started to really up its use of this emergency provision that would allow officials to remove homeless folks with less notice. That's something that I wrote about a couple years ago that was happening. It's whenever they see something that they suspect might be endangering people's health or safety, they can use this emergency provision to give people even less notice. So in some cases, folks were getting like 24-hour notice to leave. And you're absolutely right about the Bowser administration not being afraid to clear encampments. The fact is, when this federal emergency began earlier in August, there were no real big, sprawling homeless encampments left in the district because Bowser's administration had cleared almost all of them.
When we were talking about when Trump first came back to D.C. for a second term, early on, clearing a specific homeless encampment was one of the sort of demands that he made of Bowser. And come to find out, that specific encampment, the Bowser administration already had plans to remove it. They were just going to do it along a different timeline. So it's not as if that threat or that demand was totally out of sync with what she was already planning to do.
Exactly. And the city continues to clear encampments. There are still planned homeless encampment evictions scheduled for this week, for example.
Has Bowser said anything regarding this?
So I went to a press conference last week at a new bridge housing facility, which is basically a low barrier shelter that is meant to bridge the time between folks living on the street and getting into housing, perhaps with a voucher, having their own place. And the mayor was there, and I asked her about this. And I asked her about, what is being done in the immediate term to help folks who are living on the street who might be scared, who might be freaked out about seeing all of these federal agents around and hearing the rhetoric. And this facility, by the way, won't open until after the federal emergency. So that particular place right now is not a solution. And what she said is her administration's message is, come inside, we will make room for you. So what that means is that the Bowser administration is opening up excess beds in some of the shelters that it already has in operation. Kind of like what they do in the winter where it's hypothermia season, being outside can be a death sentence for people. And so they make additional space in shelter. And so what that could look like is like cots in the rec room or in the dining space. So what the Bowser administration is effectively doing now is saying, because this is a similar quote unquote emergency, if people want to come inside, if they want to get off the street, they can come to a shelter and they will not be turned away.
What if adjusting home comfort winter to summer was as easy as flipping a record? It can be when you plug into an energy-efficient electric heat pump. Side one, warm it up. Ready for side two? Cool it now. Just flip the switch. Your wallet will thank you, the planet too. And right now, get up to $5,000 off from the DC Sustainable Energy Utility, or DCSEU, when you give up gas for an efficient electric heat pump. Income-qualified residents upgrade at no cost. These record rebates won't last. Make the switch today. Visit dcseu.com/electric.
Hey, remember that amazing little cafe you discovered last summer with the perfect latte and the crazy view? Or that sweet hiking spot your friend told you about but you can't remember the name? With Overlook Maps, special places never get lost again. You can create personal lists of places you've been and want to go. Build your must-visit list for your next vacation, your foodie favorites for date nights, or your weekend getaways when you need to escape. Share your favorite hidden gems with friends and family. Let them discover that incredible barbecue joint you found, or that scenic outlook that takes your breath away. Or keep your secret spots completely private. Planning a trip with friends? Create a shared list where everyone can add their ideas. Visiting a new city? Check out lists from locals who know the real gems, not just the tourist traps. And here's the best part. There will be no ads cluttering your lists. No one's selling your data to advertisers. Just your personal collection of amazing places organized exactly how you want them. Overlook Maps. Collect, organize, and share the places that matter to you. Download free at overlookmaps.com and check out overlookmaps.com/DC to see some of our lists and great spots on a map in your pocket. Your places, your way.
How much of this is fueling the idea that, most of us here in DC don't like what Trump is doing in terms of, this bringing in federal agents? I wonder if the way that Bowser is positioning herself really gives credence to the idea that a lot of what Trump is doing, the mayor agrees with, the mayor's okay with, that they actually have alignment there.
It's something that a lot of advocates and a lot of the mayor's critics will very quickly point to, that the Trump administration's actions against the homeless seems to be very in line with actions that the mayor has already taken, a continuation of the Bowser administration's stance on homelessness, which is that they too seem to want to get visible homelessness out of the city, certainly out of the city's downtown. The mayor has been pretty reticent, it seems, to speak out against some of the Trump administration's rhetoric on this. The most I've heard her say is pointing out that homelessness is not illegal, that they don't want to be, arresting folks, that they don't want to be pushing people around unnecessarily. But they have been providing, for example, Metropolitan Police to go along with some of these actions and enforcement actions. And there are certainly aid workers and people that contract with the city who are also there. So there is a visible sense, and on site in a lot of these clearings, there is evidence that the city and the federal government are working in tandem when it comes to removing some of these camps.
Have we heard much from the city council?
The city council has been pretty quiet on this. I did talk to Councilman Robert White last week. He's the chair of the housing committee for the DC Council. And he went around late last week trying to talk to some unhoused folks. And what he told me he heard from them was some frustration that it does seem that there are people who are living on the street who notice that there's a lot more police, that there's all these federal agents, that there's National Guard. And Councilman White told me that they were asking him about the cost, about the resources being used to deploy all of these forces and asking, if we can spend all of this money on enforcement, if we can spend all this money on police, why can't there be more money being put into the housing system? And the councilman told me basically he didn't have a good answer for them.
I mean, this is the question that's been top of mind when I go down the street and I see more federal agents standing around and more National Guard standing around than civilians. I have to imagine the amount of money that we're paying for that could probably house and feed and clothe a heck of a lot of unhoused folks, no?
Yeah, I mean, you're probably right. The difference is where the money is coming from. The city budget, as it stands, is in a deficit. And vouchers have always been really hard to get in terms of numbers that meet the need of people who are homeless or housing insecure in the district. And that has been historically true even in times when the district was flush with cash. And so now that you have a city that's in the red, it's certainly going to be even more difficult to get money put into programs that provide housing, that provide vouchers, that provide subsidies for the neediest DC residents.
So you mentioned that a lot of these folks are sort of staying around downtown because that's where services are. When they are being moved, do we have any idea where they are getting moved to?
It's really interesting. There was a story I did a couple years ago where I tried to do just that, where I tracked a number of homeless folks who had been pushed out of the city's biggest encampment at the time, which was McPherson Square, which is, as you know, just blocks from the White House, and tried to follow where they ended up. And many of them over the course of a year had gotten evicted time and time and time and time again. So what would happen was they would try to move farther away and then try their luck maybe uptown or in a smaller park or in a place that was out of the way where they thought they might get left alone. And then they would get evicted again, and then that would play out again and again. And so eventually the calculation became, well, if I'm going to get evicted again, and if people are going to find me no matter where I go, I might as well be close to where I can get a shower or where I can get a meal or where I can charge my phone. And so what you kind of see is people do this loop around the city, and then they eventually end up back downtown. And there are a couple homeless folks who I have been in touch with for a few years now who are basically right back to where they started, where I met them, and are, right downtown, very close to the White House, right in sort of that downtown corridor, even though they have moved around in some cases like a dozen times to different parts of the city.
It just seems like there really are not enough shelters for these folks to get to. Is that true?
There are not enough beds in the DC shelter system for the number of homeless folks or housing insecure folks that exist in the city. That's absolutely true.
What role do hospitals or emergency rooms play in all this?
Hospitals and emergency rooms are sometimes used as like a stopgap place to get a bed, whether rightly or wrongly. There is a woman who's a homeless lady who we've been talking to the last couple weeks, and her name is Joyce. And Joyce had been living in a tent near Washington Circle, which was one of those encampments that was cleared out pretty early on by these federal forces. And after she got evicted from the encampment, she was able to stay at a hotel room for a couple nights with the assistance of a local church. And then after that, she didn't know what she was going to do. And she had some headaches. She had some physical ailments that were starting to kick in, maybe because of the stress, maybe because of all the moving, probably also because of some pre-existing conditions. And so she decided for the night after she got out of the hotel, she went to the emergency room. And she was able to spend the night in the ER. And, I don't know if that's a choice she would have made if she had an apartment to go to or somewhere else to stay. But for the time being, that got her off the street for a night. So a lot of homeless folks, especially people who have some medical conditions or things that they need assistance with, they will sometimes go and spend the night in the ER or in a hospital waiting room or somewhere like that because it's inside.
But it does sort of point to what you were talking about earlier, how it's just like a loop or shuffling where it might get somebody off the streets for a night or two, but none of these things are actual meaningful long-term solutions.
Absolutely. It's not sustainable. None of these are things that you can count on from one night to the next.
I'm curious if you've heard much from border states like Maryland or Virginia. Are they taking in any of these folks? Have they said anything?
It's a really interesting question because I think initially it's something that I certainly thought we would see this huge surge of unhoused folks who might be flooding across the borders to places where they might not be quite as under the microscope of these federal officers. But we're actually not seeing much of that. The advocates I talked to, particularly on the Maryland side of the border, said they haven't seen the numbers of DC homeless folks coming in that they thought they might. There's a lot of reasons for this. Partly, it might be because if you're already connected to services in the district, if you're in the system, if you have a caseworker, if you're getting some kind of support or subsidies or food or medical help, leaving the city means giving up all of those services. And so people are mindful of that. People are aware of that, and they don't want to do it. So instead, what actually I've heard from a lot of people is they are seeing more homeless folks on public transit. So instead of them leaving the district altogether and going to make camp in Maryland or Virginia, they're actually just seeing folks ride the metro or ride the buses. And so they might be coming into these border jurisdictions briefly, but then coming back out. And so it's another way that people are finding to stay out of sight, maybe stay out of mind, and find, an element of protection during the daylight hours when they might feel like they're being scrutinized for being on the streets in DC.
But again, that goes right back to what you were saying about how the Trump administration might be handling this, that it really is about, we don't want to see you in DC. And so that's not helping anybody come up with a long-term solution or resource to avoid homelessness or life on the street. It's, I'll ride the metro back and forth and then try to find some place to sleep.
Totally. Yeah. It's definitely a message that I think homeless folks are understanding, right? That they see what's happening. They've heard the rhetoric and they're like, okay, you don't want to see us. That's fine. I'll ride the bus for 6 hours.
You mentioned that technically just being on the street is not illegal, but there was this Supreme Court ruling last year regarding homeless folks, essentially saying that cities can, in fact, arrest people for sleeping outdoors. Is that playing into all of this at all?
Not in terms of arrests. Like I mentioned, we haven't seen any evidence that people are being arrested for sleeping outdoors. In the District of Columbia, the way that the city can move people out of a public right-of-way is by declaring an area no camping zone. Camping outside in the district, camping on national parkland is illegal. And so they have the right to remove people. They have the right to tell people they can't sleep there or camp out there or have a tent there. But just having a homeless person existing outside is not something that we've really seen enforcement or being criminalized in the district as of yet.
Is there anything that housed people can do while this is happening or should know about while this is happening?
I think that, there's a lot of ways that people can get involved if they want to help their unhoused neighbors. One of the organizations that I talked to for the story that I have coming out about homelessness in the district under the Trump crackdown is a mutual aid group in Ward 2. And they've been going around and asking people what they need, asking people what they need to get by in the next few weeks. And they were, in fact, one of the groups that collected money to put people in hotel rooms. They've also been handing out transit cards so people can get on the train or the bus. They've been handing out food and water. So there's a lot of sort of local efforts to support folks and to help folks and to try to, fill some of these gaps in services that people might be experiencing. But also, I think if people are really concerned, they can call lawmakers, right? They can call their either DC council representatives or lawmakers in Congress if they live in Maryland or Virginia and ask what's being done about this.
So we know that Trump can utilize MPD for 30 days and then he needs approval from Congress. I gotta ask, do you foresee him getting that approval and continuing all of this?
There are already bills in Congress that would extend the federal emergency. I think the most recent one that I saw that was introduced by a Republican congressman would extend the federal emergency for up to 6 months. It's not clear yet whether those are going to be approved, how seriously we should be taking those efforts. But I think it's definitely something that is top of mind for DC residents and lawmakers as we inch toward the end of the month, as we get toward the end of that 30-day window. Because if it is extended, then this goes from being sort of a temporary thing where people are trying to figure out how to get to the end of those 30 days and then reassess, and it becomes more of a long haul marathon. The thing about homeless folks is they get talked about in this way that feels very one size fits all, that, homeless people as a monolith is the way that, we hear people talking about them. And they're all really individual people, and they all have individual needs and cases and reasons for why they're not going into shelter. And when I've talked to homeless folks about, why don't you go into shelter? Why don't you go seek out one of these beds that the city is saying is available? A lot of them have really logical reasons. Joyce, the lady that I mentioned earlier, she has an adult son who has a lot of medical needs, and she doesn't want to leave him. And because they're opposite sex, they can't go into a shelter together. And because he's an adult, they can't go into the family system. They also have a dog, which there are no shelter facilities in the district that allow pets. So you see a lot of homeless folks on the street who have dogs or cats or other support animals that they can't bring with them. And so there's a lot of reasons that people have for not making themselves take one of these beds or participating in the system as it exists. And so I think to say that people are not going into shelter because they're just unreasonable or, they, for whatever reason, is being talked about is sometimes unfair to the individuals who are actually on the street here.
Marissa, thanks so much for being here.
Absolutely. Thank you for caring about this issue.
Today, we've got a couple of shout-outs from CityCast DC neighbors. Elliot B. wants to shout out Robel and his great team at Cool Coffee in Brookland. And Ryan J.'s favorite place for a drink is just a short walk down the road at Right Proper Brewing. One of my favorites, too. And Brian R.D. wants you to know about the DC Environmental Film Festival that's bringing some of the most influential environmental documentaries to our city in March. Right up my alley. And we've got some brand new CityCast DC neighbors. Thanks for joining Sharona R., Ashley A., Nancy H., and Carolyn P. This is so nice. Ashley A. tells us, my fiance and I listen all the time, getting ready in the morning and on road trips, and we so enjoy getting to know our city more and deep diving into the unique and specific topics. Love the banter and being able to connect. We, all caps, love DC and consider this our home after 15 years of living here. Thank you for your work. Oh, thank you so much, Ashley. And if you want to share your favorite local business or nonprofit on the podcast, just become a CityCast DC neighbor and send us your shout out. We'll read it right here. Becoming a neighbor is just $10 a month. You get great perks and support the local journalism that we're doing here, which is more important than ever right now. That is all for today here on CityCast DC. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell a friend, rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our great morning newsletter. We'll be back tomorrow morning with even more news from around the city. Talk to you then.